The outpost called Kestrel Station sat on the edge of a cold, quiet system named Vera, far from the busy core worlds of humanity. It was not a grand place. It was a small colony, built into the rock of a red moon, with tunnels dug deep to keep the people safe from radiation and the empty cold of space. About 4,000 humans lived there, miners, scientists, engineers, and their families. They pulled rare metals from the moon's crust and sent them back to Earth on slow cargo ships. It was a simple life, far from war, far from politics, far from anything that looked like danger. Commander Elena Cross had been in charge of Kestrel's small defense force for 6 years. She was not a soldier by first choice. She had trained as a pilot back on Earth, then moved out to the frontier because she wanted open sky and quiet nights, even if that sky was really just rock and stars seen through a viewport. Over time, she became the person everyone trusted to keep the outpost safe. Her defense force was small, 200 soldiers, a handful of patrol ships, nothing that looked like a real military. Kestrel was not built to fight. It was built to dig, to trade, and to live. Nobody at Kestrel Station expected trouble. Humanity had only been part of the wider galaxy for about 40 years, ever since first contact with a species called the Athari, a peaceful group of traders and diplomats. Since then, humans had met a few other species. Most were curious, some were distant, a few were suspicious, but no one had ever attacked a human world. The general belief among older species was that humans were new, young, and not very strong. They had ships, yes, but nothing that could match the great fleets of older empires. Humanity was seen as a colony of clever apes who had learned to fly, but had not yet learned real power. That belief was about to be tested. Far beyond Vera, in a distant part of space, lived a warrior species called the Drathk. The Drathk were a proud and old empire, one of the largest in that region of the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds over centuries. Their bodies were tall and covered in hard gray scales, their eyes a deep amber color that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. They respected only strength. To the Drathk, a species that did not fight for its worlds did not deserve to keep them. The Drathk had heard about humanity through trade rumors and old reports from smaller species who had crossed paths with human ships. The reports said humans were soft, disorganized, and easy to push around. A Drathk warlord named Kessuth decided this was a perfect opportunity. Kessuth was ambitious. He wanted glory, resources, and a quick, easy victory to bring back to his superiors. He had heard about a small human colony called Kestrel Station, rich in rare metals and poorly defended. It looked like the easiest target in the galaxy. Kessuth gathered a fleet of 12 warships and set a course for Vera. He did not expect a real fight. He expected fear, a fast surrender, and a new colony added to Drathk territory. His officers agreed. None of them had ever fought humans before. None of them had any idea what humanity truly was. The attack came without warning. It was early morning by the station's clock when the alarms went off. Elena Cross was in her office reviewing supply reports when the sound tore through the base. She dropped everything and ran for the command center, her boots echoing down the metal hallway. By the time she reached the control room, the sensors were already lit up with red warning signs. 12 unknown ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and were moving fast toward the moon. "Report," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. A young officer named Diego Reyes looked up from his console, his face pale. "Commander, we have 12 large vessels incoming. They're not responding to hails. Weapons are charging." Elena's stomach tightened. 12 warships against 2 patrol boats and a handful of light defense turrets. This was not a fight they could win in any normal sense. But running was not an option either. There was nowhere to run. Kestrel Station was home to 4,000 people who had nowhere else to go. "Get everyone into the shelters," she ordered. "Seal the lower tunnels. I want defense turrets active, and all patrol ships launched immediately." The base moved fast. Sirens rang through every corridor. Families grabbed what they could and rushed toward the deep shelters built into the moon's rock. Shelters made for meteor strikes and radiation storms, never built with an alien invasion in mind. Soldiers ran to their stations, faces tight with fear they tried to hide. Outside, the Drathk fleet closed in. Kessuth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small moon grow larger on the view screen. He gave the order to open a channel, more out of habit than respect. "Human colony," his voice boomed through the station's speakers, translated instantly by the station's language systems. "This world now belongs to the Drathk Dominion. Surrender your resources and your people will be spared as workers. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Elena's hands were steady on the comm panel, even though her heart pounded. "This is Commander Elena Cross, of Kestrel Station, Sol Federation territory. We do not recognize your claim. Leave this system or face resistance." There was a pause, then something that might have been a laugh crackled through the channel. "Resistance. From apes in metal boxes. Very well." The Drathk fleet opened fire. The first strikes hit the outer defense platforms, tearing them apart in bright flashes against the black of space. Kestrel's 2 patrol ships, small and fast but lightly armed, launched anyway, weaving between incoming fire, trying to slow the attackers down. It was not a fair fight. One patrol ship was hit within minutes, spinning off into the dark, its pilot ejecting just before the final explosion. The other kept firing, kept dodging, buying time for the people below. Inside the station, the ground shook as impacts landed on the moon's surface. Dust fell from the tunnel ceilings. Children cried in the shelters while parents held them close, trying to explain something that could not really be explained. Elena stayed at her post, coordinating what defense she could, watching the battle unfold on her screens with a growing, cold anger. She had grown up hearing stories about how humanity had once fought terrible wars against itself, wars that nearly destroyed the whole species. Those wars had ended generations ago, but the lessons from them had never been forgotten. Humanity did not build the largest fleet in the galaxy for show. It built it because it remembered what it felt like to almost lose everything, and it had promised itself, quietly, without needing to say it out loud to any other species, that it would never be caught helpless again. Elena reached for a different comm channel, one that connected not to any nearby fleet, because there was no nearby fleet, but straight back to Earth Defense Command through the long-range relay buoy stationed just outside the system. It was a channel built for true emergencies, the kind that were never supposed to be needed. "This is Kestrel Station, requesting emergency defense support. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces, 12 warships, heavy weapons fire, civilian casualties expected. Repeat, Kestrel Station is under attack." The message would take time to reach Earth, even at the speed the relay system used. Time Kestrel did not have much of. On the surface, the second patrol ship was destroyed. The defense turrets, one by one, went silent under the weight of Drathk fire. Kesuth's fleet began moving into low orbit, preparing to send down landing craft to claim the moon and its people. But something strange happened as the Drathk ships closed in. Sensors on Kesuth's flagship picked up a faint signal leaving the system, heading outward, fast, toward what looked like nothing but empty space. Kesuth did not think much of it. A distress signal, probably, sent to some distant human colony too far away to matter. He gave the order to begin the landing. He had no way of knowing that message was not going to a nearby colony. It was going straight to the heart of human space. It was going to Earth, and Earth was going to answer. Hours passed. The Drathk ships settled into orbit, confident and unchallenged, their landing craft beginning their descent toward Kestrel's surface. Inside the station, Elena Cross gathered what remained of her soldiers, preparing to defend the tunnels themselves if it came to that, ready to fight room by room to protect the people hiding below. She did not know if help was coming. She only knew that giving up was not something she was willing to do. What none of them knew, not Elena, not her soldiers, not even Kesuth and his proud Drathk officers, was that the message had already reached Earth. It had reached Earth Defense Command in the middle of a quiet afternoon, and within minutes, alarms far larger than the ones ringing through Kestrel Station had begun sounding across an entire planet. Humanity had been at peace with the wider galaxy for 40 years. It had built ships, trained crews, and prepared fleets during all that time, not because it expected war, but because it had never forgotten what it meant to be caught unprepared. Now, for the first time since making contact with the stars, that preparation was about to be tested. On Earth, deep beneath the northern mountains where Defense Command kept its offices, an alert reached the desk of Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne. He read the report twice, his face going still and cold. A human colony, attacked without warning, its people in danger, its defenders outnumbered and outgunned. Marcus Thorne set down the report and looked up at the officers waiting around him. "Sound the fleet call," he said quietly. "All available forces, we are going to Vera." Far away, on the surface of a red moon, Elena Cross checked her weapon and looked at the tunnel entrance, where Drathk soldiers would soon come marching through. She had no idea that somewhere behind her, across the vast dark of space, an answer was already on its way, an answer larger and colder and more absolute than anything the Drathk Dominion had ever imagined facing. The attack on Kestrel Station was only the beginning. What came next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations, spoken about in fear by some and in awe by others. It would be the moment every other species in that part of space learned exactly what humanity truly was, and exactly what happened when someone made the mistake of attacking one of its homes. For now, though, on Kestrel Station, all Elena Cross could do was wait, and fight, and hope that help would arrive before it was too late. Deep under the northern mountains of Earth, the halls of Defense Command came alive within minutes of Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne's order. Lights that were normally dim during quiet hours turned bright. Officers who had been sitting at desks doing routine paperwork were suddenly running, calling out orders, pulling up star charts on huge glowing screens that covered entire walls. Marcus Thorne stood in the middle of it all, calm on the outside even though his mind was racing. He had spent 30 years in the fleet, first as a young pilot, then as a captain, and now as one of the highest-ranking officers in all of human space. He had trained for a moment like this his entire career, even though some small part of him had always hoped it would never actually come. "Talk to me," he said to the officer running the main display. "How bad is it?" "Kestrel Station, Vera system," the officer said, pulling up the report. "Population around 4,000, local defenses light, 2 patrol ships and turret emplacements. The distress signal reports 12 hostile warships of unknown design, heavy weapons fire, defense forces already overwhelmed at time of transmission." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 12 warships against a mining colony was not a fair fight. It was a massacre waiting to happen, and it might already be happening while they stood here reading about it. "How far is our nearest fleet group?" "Third Fleet is stationed at Proxima Base, 4 days from Vera at standard hyperspace speed." 4 days. Far too long. Kestrel Station did not have 4 days. Marcus turned to another officer. "What about Vanguard ships? Anything faster in range?" The officer checked. "We have the Meridian Group on training exercises near the Trappist corridor. 6 ships, fast attack configuration. They could reach Vera in 14 hours if we push their engines." 14 hours was still a long time for people under attack, but it was far better than 4 days. Marcus made his decision instantly. "Send the order." Meridian Group breaks off training and heads to Vera immediately. Full engine burn. "I want Third Fleet moving as well, in case this is bigger than one colony." He paused, thinking. "And wake up the Council. They need to know humanity has just been attacked." Word spread fast once the order went out. Across Earth, and across the many human colonies scattered through nearby systems, people watched the news in stunned silence, as reports came in that a human outpost had been attacked by an unknown alien force. For 40 years, humanity had lived among the stars in relative peace. Wars had happened before humans ever reached space, terrible wars that nearly tore the species apart. But since making contact with other worlds, there had been nothing but careful diplomacy and slow trade. This was different. This was the first time another species had drawn human blood on purpose. Something old and quiet stirred in the heart of humanity that day, something that had been sleeping since the last great war on Earth, generations before. It was not simple anger. It was something closer to memory, the memory of almost losing everything, and the promise that had been made afterward, to never let it happen again. 14 hours later, the Meridian Group dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vera system. 6 ships, sleek and fast, built for speed and precision rather than raw size. Their commander, Captain Nia Okafor, studied the scene on her view screen the moment sensors came online. The Drathk fleet was still there, spread out in orbit around Kestrel's moon. Several landing craft had already touched down on the surface, Fires burned in a few sections of the station where earlier fighting had taken place. It looked bad. It looked like they might already be too late. "Report on station status," Nia said, her voice tight. Her sensor officer worked quickly. "Picking up life signs, Captain. A lot of them. Concentrated in lower tunnel sections. Looks like most of the population made it to shelter." A pause. "We're also reading combat still happening on the surface. Small arms fire near the main tunnel entrance." They were still fighting, still alive, still holding on. "Then we're not too late," Nia said. "All ships, weapons free. Target the Drathk fleet. Protect that colony." The Meridian Group moved with a speed and precision that caught the Drathk completely by surprise. Kestrel, still confident in his coming victory, had left only a light picket of ships watching the system's edge, never expecting reinforcements to arrive so quickly, if at all. He had assumed, like most of his people assumed, that human ships were slow and clumsy compared to Drathk vessels. He was wrong. The 6 human ships tore into the Drathk fleet with sharp, coordinated strikes, hitting engines and weapon systems with precise fire, rather than wasting shots on heavy armor plating. It was not brute force. It was skill, the kind that came from decades of careful training even during peacetime, training that many other species had assumed was simply wasted effort on a species too young to need it. Kestrel's flagship rocked from a direct hit to its shield generators. Alarms blared across the bridge. His officers scrambled to respond, but the human ships moved faster than expected, faster than any report had suggested they could. "Impossible," Kestrel snarled, watching 2 of his warships lose power and drift out of formation. "These are supposed to be primitive vessels." But the truth on his screen told a different story. Human ships, though smaller than his own warships, fought with a coordination that felt almost frightening, moving as a single unit, covering each other, striking weak points with a precision that suggested they had studied Drathk weapon systems long before this battle ever began. In truth, they had not studied Drathk ships specifically. They had simply trained the same way for decades, preparing for an enemy they hoped would never come, refining tactics passed down since the days of Earth's own terrible wars. On the surface, Elena Cross heard the change in the battle before she fully understood it. The Drathk soldiers who had been pushing into the tunnel entrance suddenly pulled back, their comm chatter turning urgent and confused. Through a narrow viewport near the command center, she saw streaks of light crossing the dark sky above, human fighters weaving between Drathk warships, weapons fire flashing bright against the black. "They're here," she whispered, hardly believing it. They actually came. Kestrel, watching his fleet take damage far faster than he had ever expected, made a decision that would later be remembered across the galaxy as one of the worst mistakes in Drathk history. Rather than retreating to save what remained of his ships, his pride would not allow it. He ordered a full assault, committing every remaining vessel to destroy the human reinforcements and finish claiming the colony before more help could arrive. It was the wrong choice. The Meridian Group, though outnumbered, used the terrain of the system itself, the moon, its debris field, and the shadow of a nearby gas giant to their advantage, drawing Drathk ships into positions where they could be picked off one by one. Captain Nia Okafor fought with the calm focus of someone who had trained her entire life for exactly this kind of fight, even though she had never truly expected to use those skills in real combat. Slowly, ship by ship, the Drathk fleet began to break apart. 3 warships were destroyed outright. 4 more were crippled, drifting without power. The rest, including Kestrel's own flagship, took heavy damage. What had begun as an easy conquest for the Drathk warlord had turned into a disaster. Kestrel finally gave the order to retreat, his voice tight with fury and disbelief. The remaining ships turned and fled toward the edge of the system, preparing to jump back into hyperspace and return to Drathk territory, carrying news of a defeat that no one back home would want to believe. On Kestrel Station, cheers broke out through the tunnels as word spread that the attackers were retreating. Elena Cross allowed herself a single deep breath, the first calm breath she had taken in what felt like days, even though it had only been hours. Her station was still standing. Her people were still alive. But she also understood something important as she watched the battle end on her screens. This was not truly over. The Drathk Dominion was a large empire, and Kessuth was only one warlord among many. A single defeat at one outpost would not be the end of this conflict. If anything, it might only be the beginning. Back on Earth, Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne received word of the Meridian Group's victory, with a mixture of relief and grim understanding. The colony had been saved. The immediate threat had been pushed back, but an alien empire had attacked a human world without warning, and that could not be allowed to pass without consequence. He met with the Human Defense Council that same night, a group of leaders representing every major human colony and government body. The mood in the room was heavy. For 40 years, humanity had proven to the galaxy that it could be a peaceful and reasonable member of the wider community. Now that peace had been broken, not by humanity's choice, but by someone else's decision to test whether humans were weak enough to attack. "We saved Kestrel," Marcus told the council. "But we need to understand something. This was not a random accident. The Drathk came prepared, with 12 warships, expecting an easy victory. That means somewhere in Drathk territory, someone decided humanity was a target worth attacking. If we do nothing more than defend, they will simply try again, somewhere else, with a bigger fleet." One of the council members, an older woman named Director Amara Voss, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" Marcus Thorne looked around the room at the faces waiting for his answer. "I'm suggesting that the galaxy has spent 40 years believing humanity is young and weak. It's time they learned the truth, not through more small battles at the edges of our territory, but through something they cannot misunderstand or explain away. We need to send a message so clear that no empire in this galaxy ever considers testing us again." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over everyone present. Some looked uncertain. Others, remembering old stories of humanity's darkest days on Earth, understood exactly what kind of message might be needed. Far away, in Drathk territory, Kessuth's battered fleet limped home carrying news of their failure. The Drathk Dominion's leadership was furious, not because innocent lives had been lost attacking a peaceful colony, but because a supposedly weak species had defeated one of their warlords. Reports began spreading through Drathk Command about the strange, coordinated skill of human ships, and for the first time, doubt crept into a society that had never doubted its own strength before. But doubt would not be enough to stop what was coming. Earth had made its decision. The response would not simply be a defense of one small colony. It would be something far larger, something meant to reach every corner of the galaxy, and every species watching from the shadows, waiting to see what kind of neighbor humanity truly was. Preparations began immediately. Ships were called back from every corner of human space. Fleet commanders received orders that many of them had never expected to receive in their lifetimes. Deep within Earth's most secure military facilities, plans that had existed only on paper for decades were finally pulled out and put into motion. Something had been sleeping since humanity first joined the wider galaxy, something patient and careful, built not out of aggression but out of hard lessons learned during humanity's own darkest hours. Now it was waking up. The Drathk Dominion had wanted to test humanity's strength. They were about to get an answer far bigger than anything they had imagined. The plan Earth prepared was given a quiet name inside Defense Command, Operation Silent Dawn. Few people outside the highest levels of the military and government even knew it existed until the moment it began. It was not designed to destroy the Drathk Dominion. It was not meant to kill millions of innocent people who had nothing to do with Kessuth's attack on Kestrel Station. It was designed to do something else entirely, something that would be remembered far longer than any single battle. It was designed to show the galaxy exactly what humanity was capable of, without needing to burn a single world to the ground. Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne stood before the assembled fleet commanders 3 days after the battle at Vera, inside a briefing room deep beneath Earth's surface. Large screens around the room showed star charts, fleet positions, and detailed models of Drathk territory, gathered from decades of quiet observation that few people had ever known was happening. "For 40 years, Marcus said, looking around at the officers gathered before him, we have let the galaxy believe we are new, small, and cautious. We let other species think that because we did not go looking for war, we could not fight one. That belief nearly cost 4,000 lives at Kestrel Station. It will not happen again. He brought up an image on the main screen, a planet covered in gray and green land masses, surrounded by a thin ring of orbital stations and defense platforms. It was Vokresh, the homeworld of the Drathk Dominion. Our target is not the Drathk people, Marcus continued. It is not their cities, their homes, or their families. Our target is their strength, their communication, and their pride. We are going to show every empire watching that when someone attacks a human world, Earth does not simply defend. Earth answers. The plan was bold almost beyond belief. A strike fleet, built from Earth's most advanced ships, many of them kept secret even from most human colonies, would travel deep into Drathk territory and strike directly at Vokresh itself. Not to destroy the planet, not to kill its people, but to disable its defenses, silence its communication networks, and prove without any doubt that no fleet the Drathk possessed could stop them. It was a message, not a massacre. Admiral Thorne would lead the fleet himself, a decision that surprised many of his officers, but one he insisted on. If this mission was going to define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come, he would not send others to carry that weight alone. The fleet that gathered above Earth over the following days was unlike anything most people had ever seen. 60 warships, built with technology that had been developed quietly over decades, technology that had never needed to be used before now. Among them was the flagship, a massive vessel named the Ares, built specifically for missions that required both overwhelming power and careful precision. As the fleet prepared to depart, word of the mission spread quietly through certain diplomatic channels. Earth did not want to hide what it was about to do. In fact, Marcus Thorne insisted that a message be sent ahead through neutral diplomatic contacts, reaching several major species councils before the fleet even arrived at its destination. The message was simple. Humanity had been attacked without warning by the Drathk Dominion. Humanity had defended itself. Now humanity was going to make sure such an attack never happened again, and every species watching was invited to see exactly how that promise would be kept. It was a message built on confidence, not fear, and it worked exactly as intended, spreading fast through networks connecting dozens of species across that region of the galaxy. Among those who received the message was a young diplomat from the Athari, the same peaceful species that had first made contact with humanity 40 years earlier. Her name was Senna Vale, and she had spent years studying human culture and history as part of her work building relationships between the two species. When she heard about Operation Silent Dawn, she felt a strange mix of worry and understanding. She had read the old human history archives, shared openly by human historians, who believed that hiding the past only led to repeating it. She had studied humanity's darkest wars, wars that had come dangerously close to destroying the species entirely, before it ever reached the stars. She understood something that many other species did not. Humanity was not naturally aggressive. It was naturally careful, built by hard experience to avoid war whenever possible. But when war was forced upon it, humanity did not fight halfway. Senna requested permission to observe the coming events from a neutral diplomatic vessel, a request that Earth granted without hesitation. If the galaxy was going to witness this moment, Earth wanted witnesses who could explain honestly what they saw, rather than letting rumors and fear twist the truth into something worse than reality. Meanwhile, deep in Drathk territory, panic was spreading through the highest levels of their government. News of Keseth's defeat at Vera had already damaged Drathk pride badly, but now reports were coming in of a massive human fleet moving through their space, heading in a direction that pointed unmistakably toward Vokresh itself. The Drathk High Council convened an emergency session. Warlord Keseth, still recovering from the humiliation of his failed attack, stood before the council, trying to explain how a supposedly weak species had defeated his fleet. Their ships fought with more precision than our own veteran crews, Keseth admitted, his voice tight with frustration. Their weapons systems were more accurate. Their coordination was flawless. I do not understand how a species so young could fight this way. An older council member, High Speaker Drathk, studied reports on a screen before him, his expression grim. Because they have been preparing for this longer than we realized. Humanity did not learn to fight from us. They arrived already knowing how. The Drathk scrambled to gather their home defense fleet, calling back ships from other parts of their territory. preparing planetary defense systems that had not been fully tested in generations. But even as they prepared, a deep uncertainty spread through their ranks. If a single warlord's fleet had been defeated so completely by only 6 human ships, what chance did they have against 60? The human fleet arrived at the edge of the Vokresh system 4 days later, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Sensors aboard Drathk defense stations lit up instantly, alarms sounding across the planet as the scale of the approaching fleet became clear. Admiral Marcus Thorne stood on the bridge of the Ares, watching the planet grow larger on the main view screen. Around him, his crew worked with quiet, focused calm, each of them trained for exactly this kind of moment, even though none of them had ever truly believed they would experience it in their lifetime. "Open a channel to the planet," Marcus ordered. Moments later, his voice carried across every communication frequency the Drathk used, translated instantly into their language. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne, of Earth's Defense Fleet. 12 of your warships attacked a peaceful human colony, without warning, killing our people, and threatening thousands more. We are not here to destroy your world. We are here to make certain this never happens again." The Drathk home fleet, roughly 40 warships strong, moved to intercept the human fleet, forming a defensive line between the approaching ships and the planet below. Warlord Kesseth himself commanded the defense, determined to redeem his earlier failure. "All ships, engage," Kesseth ordered, his voice carrying grim determination through his fleet's communication network. "We will not let them reach the homeworld." The battle that followed would later be studied by military academies across dozens of species for generations to come. It was not a battle of overwhelming numbers, since both fleets were roughly matched in ship count. It was a battle of skill, technology, and preparation. And in every one of those areas, humanity proved itself far beyond what anyone outside Earth had ever expected. Human ships moved, with a coordination that seemed almost impossible, striking key systems on Drathk vessels with precise, devastating accuracy. Shield generators failed, weapon systems went dark, engines were disabled rather than destroyed outright, a deliberate choice that confused Drathk commanders, who expected pure destruction rather than careful, controlled disabling strikes. Marcus Thorne had given clear orders before the battle began. This was not meant to be a slaughter. Ships that surrendered or retreated were to be left alone. The goal was not to kill as many Drathk as possible. The goal was to prove, beyond any doubt, that Earth's fleet could not be stopped, while still showing restraint that no one expected from a supposedly young and reckless species. That restraint, more than anything else, terrified the Drathk far more than raw aggression ever could have. An enemy that fought only out of anger could be predicted and eventually worn down. An enemy that fought with complete control, choosing exactly how much damage to deal and exactly when to hold back, was something far more unsettling. Within 3 hours, the Drathk home fleet was broken. Half their ships were disabled and drifting. A quarter had been destroyed after refusing to stand down despite clear opportunities to retreat. The rest fled toward the planet's surface, seeking whatever protection the planetary defense grid could offer. It was not enough. Admiral Thorne gave the final order of the battle, one that had been planned carefully from the very beginning. Rather than bombing the planet's surface or targeting its cities, the human fleet focused its remaining strength on something far more precise. Every orbital communication relay, every planetary defense platform, and every major military command center on the surface of Vokresh was struck with pinpoint precision, disabled rather than destroyed, silenced rather than shattered. Within hours, the homeworld of the Drathk Dominion, once one of the most powerful empires in that region of the galaxy, found itself completely cut off. No communication could leave the planet. No defense system could respond. No fleet could be called for help. For the first time in centuries, the Drathk people experienced complete and total silence, unable to speak to their own colonies, unable to warn anyone, unable to do anything but watch as human ships held position in their skies. 60 human warships hung above Vokresh in complete control, weapons ready but not firing, waiting patiently while the reality of the situation sank in across the planet below. Senna Vale, watching from her neutral observation vessel at a safe distance, felt a chill run through her, as she recorded everything she saw for the Athari archives. She had expected destruction. She had expected fire and death spreading across an entire world. Instead, she watched something far more chilling in its own way, a demonstration of complete and total control. Power held back not because it could not be used, but because Earth had chosen precisely how much of it needed to be shown. The message was clear, even without a single word needing to be spoken. Humanity had not simply defended itself. It had reached across the galaxy, struck at the very heart of an empire that had wronged it, and silenced that empire completely, all while leaving its cities and its people largely untouched. It was, in its own strange way, an act of terrifying mercy, and every species watching from the shadows of that region of the galaxy understood, in that single moment, that everything they had believed about humanity had been wrong. News of what happened at Vokresh did not travel slowly. It moved through trade routes, diplomatic channels, and private communication networks, faster than almost anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Within a single week, nearly every major species with any connection to that region of space had heard some version of the story. A human fleet had traveled deep into enemy territory, defeated a Drathk home fleet nearly matched in size, and silenced an entire homeworld without destroying a single city. The story spread in different forms depending on who was telling it. Some versions exaggerated the destruction, claiming Earth had wiped out half the planet's population. Other versions undersold what happened, claiming it was a lucky victory against a weakened defense force. But the diplomatic report filed by Senna Vale, the young Athari observer who had watched the entire event firsthand, became the most trusted account across dozens of species, precisely because it was calm, detailed, and refused to exaggerate in either direction. Her report described exactly what she had seen: a fleet capable of overwhelming victory that chose restraint, a species capable of total destruction that chose precision instead. It was this combination, power paired with control, that unsettled other species far more than simple aggression ever could have. Across the galaxy, in council chambers and government halls belonging to species who had never had any direct contact with humanity at all, a quiet, uneasy silence began to settle. Species who had barely thought about the young human civilization before suddenly found themselves studying old reports, reviewing decades of largely ignored data, trying to understand exactly what kind of neighbor they had been living near, without ever fully realizing it. On a world called Corvale, home to a trade-focused species known as the Corvins, merchants who had done business with both humans and Drathk for years gathered nervously in private meeting halls to discuss what the news meant for their trade routes. The Corvins were not a warlike people. They survived by staying neutral, by trading fairly with everyone, and by avoiding any conflict that might threaten their business. What had happened at Vokresh forced many of them to reconsider long-held assumptions. "We always assumed humans were the safe choice," said an older Corvin trader, named Belin Thas, during one such meeting, his voice troubled. Young, eager to please, easy to negotiate with. Now I wonder if we simply never gave them a reason to show us otherwise. Similar conversations were happening across dozens of worlds. Species who had quietly looked down on humanity, seeing it as a new and somewhat naive addition to galactic society, now found themselves rereading old trade agreements and diplomatic messages with new eyes, searching for any sign of disrespect they might have shown, without realizing the risk. Not every reaction was fear, however. Some species reacted with something closer to respect, even admiration. The Athari, having studied humanity closely for decades, found themselves in an interesting position. They had always seen humans as a species worth understanding, rather than underestimating, and the events at Vokresh only confirmed what many of their scholars had suspected for years. Senna Vale was invited to speak before the Athari Grand Council shortly after her report was filed, standing before rows of elder diplomats and scholars in the great circular chamber at the heart of Athari government. "What I witnessed was not simple violence," she told the council, choosing her words carefully. "It was restraint, used as a weapon in its own right. Humanity showed the galaxy that it could destroy an entire world's ability to fight without destroying the world itself. That is not the action of a reckless species. That is the action of a species that has already learned, through its own painful history, exactly how far destruction can go, and has chosen deliberately not to go there again, unless truly forced. One of the older council members leaned forward. And do you believe they will use this power again, should another species make the same mistake the Drathk made? Senna considered the question carefully before answering. I believe humanity does not want war. Their own history makes that clear. But I also believe they will never again allow themselves to be seen as weak enough to attack safely. That balance, wanting peace while being fully capable of overwhelming response, may be the very thing that keeps this region of the galaxy stable for a long time to come. Meanwhile, deep within Drathk territory, the aftermath of Vokresh's silencing created chaos of a different kind. With Homeworld communications down for nearly 3 full days before Earth allowed limited systems to be restored under careful watch, Drathk colonies across their empire had no idea what was happening at the heart of their own government. Rumors spread wildly. Some colonies believed the Homeworld had been destroyed entirely. Others believed a rebellion had taken place. Panic and confusion spread through territories that had always relied completely on strong, centralized communication from Vokresh. When communications were finally restored, under strict agreements negotiated between Earth and the shaken Drathk High Council, the truth came out clearly across every Drathk world. Their homeworld had been surrounded, their defenses disabled, their command centers silenced, all without a single city being destroyed. It was, in its own way, more frightening than total destruction would have been. Destruction could be understood as an act of hatred or revenge. This felt like something else entirely, a demonstration of complete control, a message that said clearly, we could have destroyed you, and we chose not to. Warlord Keseth, the officer whose decision to attack Kestrel Station had started the entire chain of events, faced severe consequences from his own government. Stripped of his rank and his fleet, he became a symbol across Drathk space of the dangers of underestimating a species simply because it was new to the galaxy. His name would be remembered for generations, not as a great warrior, but as a cautionary tale. High Speaker Drathk, who had watched the entire crisis unfold from within the Drathk Council chambers, addressed his people in a public broadcast once communications were fully restored. His words were carefully chosen, meant to calm a frightened population, while also acknowledging the seriousness of what had happened. We made an error in judgment, Drathk admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. We believed strength could be measured simply by how long a species has existed among the stars. We were wrong. Humanity has shown us, and shown the wider galaxy, that strength is not measured in years, but in preparation, discipline, and the wisdom to know when to hold power back. It was a rare moment of humility from a species that had built its entire identity around conquest and dominance, and it did not go unnoticed by other empires watching from a distance, quietly reconsidering their own assumptions about the galaxy's newest neighbors. Back on Earth, the mood was far more complicated than simple celebration. While many people felt pride in how their fleet had defended a threatened colony and protected human interests across the galaxy, there was also a deep, quiet unease running through public conversation. Humanity had just demonstrated, on a galactic stage, exactly how much destructive power it truly held in reserve. That was not something to celebrate carelessly. Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne addressed the Human Defense Council upon his fleet's return, his expression tired but steady. We did what needed to be done, he told the assembled leaders, but I want to be clear about something. What happened at Vokresh should never become something we are eager to repeat. We showed restraint this time, because restraint was possible. It will not always be that simple. I hope, for everyone's sake, that no other empire ever forces us to make that choice again. Director Amara Voss, who had first heard Marcus present his plan for Operation Silent Dawn, studied him carefully. Do you believe the message was received the way we intended, Admiral? Marcus thought for a long moment before answering. I believe every species watching now understands 2 things clearly. First, that humanity will defend what belongs to it, without hesitation, no matter how far we must travel to do so. Second, that we are capable of far greater destruction than we chose to use, and that choice, more than the destruction itself, may be the thing they remember longest. Across the galaxy, in the weeks that followed, something subtle but undeniable began to shift. Diplomatic messages to human colonies became noticeably more respectful. Trade negotiations that had once leaned heavily in favor of older, more established species suddenly became more balanced. Species that had never bothered sending official greetings to Earth began requesting formal meetings, eager to establish relationships before any misunderstanding could arise between their people and humanities. It was not fear alone driving this shift, though fear certainly played its part. It was recognition, a slow, galaxy-wide realization that humanity, this young species that had only recently joined the wider community of stars, had proven itself to be something far more careful, far more capable, and far more dangerous when provoked than anyone had previously understood. On Kestrel Station, life slowly began returning to something resembling normal. Repairs continued on damaged sections of the Outpost. New defense systems, far stronger than anything the colony had possessed before, were installed under direct orders from Earth Defense Command. Commander Elena Cross stood one evening near the main viewport, looking out at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened in what felt like both a very short and a very long span of time. She had watched her small, quiet mining outpost become the spark that ignited a chain of events reaching across the entire galaxy. She had not asked for that responsibility, and she had certainly never expected it. But standing there, watching the stars twinkle steadily above a moon that had nearly been lost forever, she felt something settle quietly inside her, a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and a strange kind of pride. Humanity had been tested, and humanity had answered. Not with blind rage, not with total destruction, but with exactly enough force to make its point clearly understood, and exactly enough restraint to prove that force was not the only thing humanity had to offer the galaxy. Far beyond Kestrel Station's quiet moon, across dozens of worlds and hundreds of star systems, the galaxy had grown noticeably quieter, watchful, and careful in a way it had never been before. Species that had spent generations building their reputations through conquest and intimidation now found themselves reconsidering their approach entirely, wondering what other surprises this strange, unpredictable young species might still be hiding. The silence that followed Vokresh was not the silence of destruction. It was the silence of an entire galaxy pausing, watching, and learning to be careful. A year passed after the events at Vokresh, and the galaxy that emerged from that year looked different from the one that had existed before. Not because borders had changed, or because new wars had broken out, but because something quieter and more lasting had shifted in how dozens of species understood their place among the stars, and how they understood humanity's place among them. Kestrel Station had been rebuilt, stronger than before. What had once been a lightly defended mining colony now stood as one of the best protected outposts along humanity's frontier, its new defense grid capable of holding off far more than 12 warships should anyone ever be foolish enough to try again. Commander Elena Cross remained in charge, though she had been offered several promotions to more comfortable postings closer to Earth. She turned each one down. Kestrel was her home, and after everything that had happened there, she felt a responsibility to the people who had trusted her to keep them safe. She often thought back to that first terrifying day, the sirens, the shaking walls, the fear in her soldiers' eyes, as Drathk ships closed in around them. It felt like a lifetime ago now, though the memory remained sharp and clear whenever she let herself think about it too long. She had learned something important that day, something she tried to pass on to every new soldier who joined her small defense force. Strength was not about never being afraid. It was about doing what needed to be done anyway, even when the odds looked impossible. Far across the galaxy, the Drathk Dominion had changed as well, though the change had not come easily. High Speaker Drathk remained in leadership, guiding his people through a difficult period of reflection following the humiliation at Vokresh. Old habits of conquest and intimidation, practices that had defined Drathk culture for centuries, slowly began giving way to more careful diplomacy. Not because the Drathk had lost their strength or their pride entirely, but because they had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of underestimating others. Warlord Keseth, stripped of his rank and living quietly on a remote Drathk colony, occasionally gave interviews to historians, studying the events he had unintentionally set into motion. He never fully escaped the shame of his failure, but over time, something like understanding replaced his earlier bitterness. "I saw them as weak because they had not yet needed to prove otherwise," he admitted during one such interview, years later. "That was my mistake. Strength that has not yet been tested is still strength. I simply refused to consider that possibility, until it was far too late." Across the wider galaxy, humanity's reputation settled into something far more balanced than the fear that had first spread following Vokresh. Species who took the time to actually engage with human diplomats and traders found a people who valued fairness, who kept their promises, and who preferred cooperation over conflict whenever possible. The events at Kestrel Station and Vokresh had not turned humanity into a feared conqueror, seeking to expand its territory through intimidation. If anything, Earth became more careful than ever about how it used its military strength, mindful of how quickly reputation, once earned, could be misunderstood or misused. Senna Vale, the young Ithari diplomat who had witnessed the events at Vokresh firsthand, went on to become one of the leading voices in Ithari human relations, helping build stronger diplomatic and trade agreements between the two species over the following years. She often gave lectures to young diplomats from various species, preparing to work with human representatives for the first time. "Do not mistake their patience for weakness," she would tell each new group of students, "and do not mistake their strength for cruelty." Humanity is a species shaped by hard lessons from its own difficult past. They do not seek conflict, but they will not allow themselves to be tested carelessly again. Approach them with honesty and respect, and you will find capable, fair partners. Approach them the way Kessuth did, and you will learn exactly why the galaxy grew quiet after Vokresh. Trade between human colonies and dozens of other species flourished in the years that followed, built on a foundation of mutual respect that had been sorely lacking before. New alliances formed. Old assumptions about humanity being simply a young, developing species faded, replaced by a more accurate understanding of a civilization that had endured its own terrible trials long before ever reaching the stars, and had emerged from those trials more careful, more disciplined, and more prepared than almost anyone had realized. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne eventually stepped back from active fleet command, taking on a role advising the Human Defense Council on long-term galactic strategy. He remained a quiet, steady presence, often reminding younger officers and political leaders alike about the responsibility that came with the kind of power humanity had shown the galaxy it possessed. During one address to a new class of young fleet officers, years after the events at Vokresh, he shared words that would be remembered and repeated for generations within the fleet's academies. "We did not become strong so that we could conquer," he told the gathered cadets. "We became strong because we remembered what it felt like to almost lose everything, long before we ever left our own world. That memory is not something to be proud of, in the way pride is normally understood. It is something to be respectful of, something that should make each of you think carefully, before ever raising a weapon against another living being. Strength without wisdom is simply another kind of danger. Never forget that difference." Kestrel Station held a small memorial each year on the anniversary of the attack, honoring both the soldiers who had defended the outpost that day and the crew of the Meridian Group who had answered the desperate call for help. Elena Cross always spoke at these gatherings, her words simple and honest, never dramatic, always focused on gratitude rather than glory. "We were not saved because we were strong enough to save ourselves," she would remind the gathered colonists each year. "We were saved because we were part of something larger, something that remembered its promise to protect its people, no matter how far away they might be. Never take that promise for granted, and never forget the courage it took for so many people to answer it." As the years passed, the story of Kestrel Station and the silencing of Vokresh became something closer to legend across the galaxy, told and retold by dozens of species in dozens of different ways. Some versions focused on the battle itself, the daring defense of a small colony against overwhelming odds. Other versions focused on the larger message, the demonstration of restraint and control that had reshaped how an entire region of the galaxy understood humanity's place among the stars. But the truth, as always, remained simpler and more human than any legend could fully capture. A group of ordinary people had faced an impossible situation with courage. A fleet had answered a desperate call for help without hesitation. And a species that had learned hard lessons from its own painful history had chosen, when finally tested on a galactic stage, to show both its strength and its wisdom, understanding that true power was not measured only by what could be destroyed, but by what could be protected, and by what destruction could be chosen not to use. The galaxy had gone silent after Vokresh, not out of fear alone, but out of a deeper, more lasting kind of respect, the sort of quiet, careful respect that comes only after truly understanding exactly what kind of neighbor you are sharing the stars with. And on a small red moon at the edge of human space, life continued quietly at Kestrel Station, exactly as it had before that terrible day, exactly as its people had always hoped it would. Safe now, not simply because of stronger walls and better weapons, but because the entire galaxy had learned, in the clearest way possible, that humanity would always answer when its people called for help. The stars above Kestrel Station remained calm and steady, night after night, a quiet reminder that even in the vast, uncertain darkness of space, some promises were worth keeping, no matter how far they had to travel to be kept.